Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Maya Williams-Barone. I'm the host for this event, and welcome to our alumni book talk. I'm also the program director of the Harvard Club of Southern California, and soon I'll be introducing our speaker, Reverend Ann Gardner, who will make a presentation, and then we'll have time for questions. But first, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupied land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Kizh, and Chumash peoples. We pay respect to their elders and descendants and recognize them as the traditional stewards of these lands, as well as the legacy of violence, settlement, and displacement that they forcibly suffered and survived. By committing ourselves to Indigenous justice, building authentic, mutual, and lasting relationships with tribes and Indigenous communities, we honor and stand with all Indigenous people who work tirelessly toward justice and healing. And now for our speaker. Ann Gardner is an Episcopal minister who received her degree from Harvard's Divinity School in 2005. After spending 25 years working at two of Boston's premier educational institutions, Harvard University and Phillips Academy, Andover, Reverend Gardner currently leads the chaplaincy program at Harvard Westlake, a private secondary school in Los Angeles. She also finds time to work as a freelance writer. Her essays and columns have been featured in the National Catholic Reporter, the Boston Globe, the Providence Journal, New England Tennis Magazine, and most recently as part of WBUR's Cognoscenti series, Boston's NPR affiliate. Tonight, Ann will be speaking to us about her 500-mile walk across Spain on the famed Camino de Santiago. Her journey inspired a book, And So I Walked, Reflections on Chance, Choice, and the Camino de Santiago, a memoir. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce you to Reverend Ann Gardner.
It's so lovely that all of you have carved out some time in your evening to spend with me talking about this experience that I kind of came across serendipitously and that really in so many ways changed my life professionally and certainly personally. So I put together a very short slide deck. And let's see if we can get that going. Is everybody able to see that?
Yes, I think that's
yes,
good.
Thumbs up. Okay. Great. Great. First of all, of course, thanks to the Harvard Club of Southern California. I'm a fairly recent transplant to the Los Angeles area, so having an opportunity to meet some of my colleagues here in this part of the United States is a wonderful thing. And I think more than anything, I wanted to start with this quote by Margaret Atwood. She's one of my favorite authors, but I think both professionally, as in my role as a minister, and certainly in my role as a writer, this quote kind of crystallizes what my approach is, that everybody has a story. Everyone is filled with stories, and this is one of the ways in which we come to know each other, come to share our lives. And so tonight you'll hear just a little bit of mine. The picture on the cover of the book is magnified here and is actually a picture I took while I walked the first time. I went initially and did the 500-mile journey in the summer of 2010, in some ways as a commemoration of my 50th birthday. And this actually was part of the landscape that I traversed. And as you can see, it is jaw-droppingly beautiful and mostly very remote. And I think there were many days where I felt like I was just walking into a postcard, but I didn't know about the Camino until very, very late in my life. I was actually raised in the Roman Catholic Church by two Irish parents. So I had my childhood had all the trappings that you would imagine: the plaid skirts, the knee socks, the Baltimore Catechism. We even had a picture of President Kennedy up on our dining room wall. I was really immersed in the faith of my youth. And in all of that time, I never heard about the Camino de Santiago. I never heard about all these various pilgrimages that have literally existed for thousands and thousands of years until I went to a cocktail party. So my Camino journey actually starts at a cocktail party at the then head of school's house at Phillips Andover, where I spent 12 years before coming to Harvard Westlake. So I had just been invited to join the faculty there. I moved into one of the dorms. I started and survived the gauntlet known as faculty orientation. And at the end, there was a party, a large party for all faculty to come the night before classes began. And so I went, but I'm shy. I was shy. I continue to be shy, but I knew I needed to go to this party anyway, that it was sort of part of the process. So I went and was greeted at the door by the then head of school. And I went into this beautiful grand mansion that exists on Main Street where the head of school is housed. And I could already see all of my colleagues clustered together in animated conversation, because so many people, once they go to Andover, they never leave. So most of my colleagues had been there well over a decade, had long-standing friendships, were excited to see their old friends and colleagues once the summer had eclipsed. And already just a couple of steps into the house, I was feeling awkward and out of step. And as I was sort of sitting in that awkward moment, thankfully, one of my colleagues came over to introduce herself and sort of saved me from my own awkwardness. Her name was Carmel Rodriguez, and she was from Cuba. She was a member of the World Languages Department at Andover, and herself was a person of faith. So as part of my introduction to her, when she discovered I was the new campus minister, she immediately started launching into this conversation, this lengthy conversation about the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And frankly, I was embarrassed to admit to Carmel that I had never heard of the Camino. And so she sat me down and we got a couple of plates of nibbles, and she talked to me about this 500-mile path that starts on the border of France and Spain and that traverses the entire width of Spain, ending in a town called Santiago, where the cathedral, it's believed that underneath the altar are interred the remains of the patron saint of Spain, of St. James. And I don't know what it was, but I was entirely captivated, either by Carmel or by this conversation or by the idea of doing this pilgrimage. And the more she described it, the more interested I got. And even after I left that party, I left with that idea, like, I need to somehow do this, that this was a message to me, that I'm being called to do this, and that this piece of me, this piece of my heart and my soul about wandering was something that I always had. I was always somebody who was intrigued with exploration and travel and different cultures and just wanting to always go. And when she presented this notion of this pilgrimage, I was just, she had me at hello. There's a couple of brief snippets that I want to read from the book. And the first one actually is about this piece of my wandering. So let me just read you a little bit about how this kind of started for me. My childhood hero was Amelia Earhart, the famed pilot who lost her way, never to be found again. I first learned about her while in elementary school. She was the only woman to be included in a course of study dominated by dead white men. It was the 1960s, after all. Had it not been for Louisa May Alcott, Betsy Ross, and the witch trials of Salem, my entire grade school curriculum might have been devoid of double X chromosomes. In Earhart, I discovered someone who bucked convention in a different sort of way. She was rakish in both attitude and experience. She exuded a sassiness I dared not express. Lanky and boyish, she fought her way into the male-dominated world of aviation, becoming the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. She was not deterred by even the most daunting of challenges. As far as Amelia was concerned, the world was her oyster. Hoping to circumnavigate the globe, Earhart was making good progress on what was to be her last flight when she headed toward Howland Island to refuel. But somehow she fell off course. She lost radio contact, and without it, any hope of navigating to safety. In one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century, Earhart's plane was never recovered, nor were her remains or those of her navigator, Frederick Noonan. It is a disquieting thought to imagine her scanning the horizon of the Pacific, desperate for a glimpse of land during that long ago July of 1937. Decades later, in July of 1999, a similar fate would befall John F. Kennedy Jr. as the ocean and sky of the Atlantic became inverted, leading his Piper Saratoga to spiral into the sea. I was then living in Falmouth, a small town on Cape Cod just across the water from Martha's Vineyard, Kennedy's destination that doom-filled day. I remember hearing the whir of helicopters the morning after the crash as they hovered off the coast, looking for debris or casualties or both. Like Earhart, he would never again be seen alive. Kennedy's death lingered in my heart, partly because of its similarity to the idol of my youth. But despite these unnerving stories, I never lost my own lust to explore. It was an heirloom passed on to me by my mother, an adventuresome spirit who spent much of her life caged by convention and responsibility. I can still see her in my mind's eye, stopping to gaze out over the churning ocean waves during those countless beach walks of my youth. The wind would be in her face, her hair blown straight back off her forehead. Her eyes would water behind those big circular sunglasses housewives wore at the time, inspired by the fashion styles of Jackie Onassis. But it was the look on her face I remember most, a pain and longing deeply etched into her brow. For the rest of my life, I would feel tension between us. She was so smart and so talented, but she was a ringleader without a ring. One moment she would push me to make the most of the changing landscape for women. The next, she would resent me for doing so. She had June Cleaver. I had Mary Tyler Moore. It was never a fair fight. So it was really that exploration, that lust was really all about my mother. It's still in me. I still miss that about her to this day. So eventually, after this cocktail party, I said, you know what? I'm really going to do it. I'm really going to do this pilgrimage. I'm going to do this. And I couldn't imagine anyone wanting to go with me. And frankly, I was okay with that. I wanted to go by myself because I thought then I could really do it at my own pace. I could experience it in my own way. I wouldn't be needing to adjust in any way for somebody else's temperament or speed or gaze. And so I approached my wife kind of timidly with this idea that I wanted to do this walk. And I wanted to do it by myself. My wife, Beth, hates walking, hates it, finds no interest in it at all. So I thought this would be a kind of somewhat easy hurdle to get over. And yet she balked. She wasn't interested in doing the walk herself, but I think there was a part of her that thought that I would go have this transformational experience and never really be able to explain to her what it was like, what it was all about. And so after a lot of conversation and sort of wringing of hands, she decided she was going to come with me, even if just for a portion of the walk, so that she could really understand this experience that was obviously so important to me. And once she decided to join and people found out about it, I was approached by a handful of other people who wanted to join our group. And I was very cautious, frankly, about whether or not that was a good idea. In the end, our group became a group of 5. And you can see the 4 other feet there. Mine are not in that shot because I'm the one taking the picture. But it was myself, my wife, Beth. 2 of my students at Andover came with us. Both had just graduated. They were both 18. They had both just finished their senior year. One was this strapping farmhand boy from Kansas, and the other was a deeply devout Muslim girl from outside of Boston, from suburban Boston. But they were both, I had both known them for years. I felt totally comfortable with them, and they were old souls. I wasn't worried about taking them along. And the other 5th person was a colleague from mine from a previous job who was super young and super fit. She was much more physically fit than the rest of us. So we ended up being the Fab 5, myself, my wife, Beth, Meredith, the Muslim student, Sasha, the Kansas farmhand boy, and my friend Jess. So the 5 of us set out. So we all sort of tried to get ready for this pilgrimage in our own ways, physically, mentally, emotionally. But one day, all of us gathered in the dorm where Beth and I were then living, and we each brought packs, and we were trying to decide how and how much that we were going to take, and going through the whole process of the practicalities of what it might be like to do a long distance hike. And at the end of that conversation, I sort of half-heartedly said to them, I think we should come up with nicknames. I think it would be fun to all have a nickname for this trip. And we decided that we were going to all decide to have a nickname that was based on the word go. And so I decided I would start off, and I said, I'm going to be Let Go, because as somebody who has long had way too much of a tight rein, and wanting control and wanting everything to sort of be perfect and cataloged and predictable, I thought the Camino would really test me, and I would have to let go if I was going to be able to do this successfully. So I decided to be Let Go. Beth, who came immediately after me, in her sardonic way said, "Ugh, I'll just be Just Go," because again, she had no interest in doing this at all. And so Let Go, Just Go. Sasha, who was by far the most had the best physical, was the best physical specimen, decided he was going to be Go Slow, because he could obviously have done this pilgrimage easily by himself, quickly. He was going to have no difficulty physically in accomplishing this task, but he felt like he needed to just pull it back a little bit and let the pilgrimage come to him and absorb it in a different kind of way. And so he decided he was going to be Go Slow. And then Meredith, the only one of the 5 of us who had any language skills at all, she spoke both English and French and Spanish. She decided she was going to be Amigo, because she was going to have to be the conduit between the rest of us and whoever else we met that didn't speak English. And then Jess, who was, again, just sort of like the rabbit of the group, decided in Nancy Sinatra-esque fame that she was just going to be Go-Go. So it ended up being Let Go, Just Go, Go Slow, Amigo, and Go-Go. So here we are. Here's the map of the entire route that you see, Santiago on the far left. And again, these 500 miles begin with you cresting the Pyrenees Mountains in France, and then coming across through 3 fairly distinct terrains. The first part over France, and then basically all the way pretty much to Burgos, are beautiful rolling hills filled with vineyards and rivers, very pleasant, very pastoral in a way. And both Pamplona and Burgos are towns of fairly significant size. So although you're walking through much terrain that is quite remote, you do have these moments where you encounter towns where there's a lot more services, which is particularly helpful for hikers. That middle section from Burgos to Lyon is called the Meseta, And it's basically just one flat tabletop where you have to walk up a very steep slope to get on the Meseta just after Burgos, and then across the Meseta, and then back down to go into Leon. And it's a totally different topography than the first part. It's entirely devoid almost of any vegetation. It's quite high in elevation, and it is hot, hot, hot. It is just like being in a frying pan, frankly. So all of the pleasant weather and the rolling hills that you were seduced by when you first started abruptly ends at the Meseta. And there are many people, although it's quite flat, that actually suffer the most on the Meseta. And I was definitely one of those people. I found it easier to deal with the terrain and less easy to deal with the temperature than the other way around. After you get past Leon, you go back into this sort of lush mountains of Galicia, which means the elevation is quite high. It's very mountainous. It's very steep. And it actually rains quite a bit. So it's really hard. It's really hard on your legs, on your knees, on your lungs. And there are points, even in the summer, where it's so cold that it can actually snow. So you've just been in the Meseta where it's like 95 degrees and you're just melting. And then you go into something where you're putting on all of the clothes that you have in your pack, putting socks on your hands to act as mittens, all that kind of stuff to survive the altitude of the last portion of Galicia. So true to my word here, here's a little snippet that from that piece of the walk that was the Meseta, which again, for me, was by far the most difficult. I lumbered out of bed at daybreak and began walking the most lifeless section of the Camino I had yet experienced. The road was straight as an arrow, so straight I strained to see any variation in the landscape ahead of me. Pythagoras himself could have not convinced me that the world was round that morning. I felt like I was on a giant griddle, sizzling under the sun, striding across an endless pancake of dirt. The Meseta's extreme heat and lack of shade were beginning to take their toll. An amalgamation of recessive genes, I had auburn hair, green eyes, and skin so fair it began to redden within minutes of being out in the sun. In an attempt to combat this pedigree, I had chosen to don both pants and long sleeve shirts for the entire time I was on the Camino, regardless of how high the temperature rose. The only skin that ever saw the light of day was on the back of my hands and the tips of my ears. Every morning I made sure the rest of my head and neck were shrouded under a ball cap, bandana, and a healthy dose of sunblock. Despite my efforts, the power of the sun overwhelmed me. Small blisters began to form on the small patches of skin that were exposed, extending past my knuckles toward the tops of my fingers. With my hands now swollen and pink, it became painful to make a fist or even tie my own shoes. As I walked, I could literally feel my skin burning. Occasionally, I would tug my shirt sleeves down over my hands, but without being able to grasp the fabric for long, the cuffs would eventually creep back up, once again leaving the backs of my hands uncovered. By this point, the pilgrimage had become a grind. The heat, the insects, and a swath of blisters on both my hands and feet. Even the flat terrain sparked no gratitude in me. I had lost my rhythm and in some ways my purpose. My mental discipline was beginning to falter. It is discouraging and humbling to realize the impact a bit of discomfort can provoke. I reminded myself the Camino was a marathon and not a sprint. Just keep fighting, I chanted. Just keep moving. We stopped for the night at a hostel located right off the path. With another 11 miles or so behind us, I was eager to spend the afternoon inside the cool interior. Paco, our host for the night, led us to a back room and then promptly chastised Sasha for throwing his pack on the lower bunk. Those are reserved for the old and infirm, he declared. And then, without missing a beat, he turned and graciously offered the cot to me. I guess it was time to stop taking myself so seriously. So if you do decide that you want to do this walk, or even a portion of it, it's a one-way journey. You can't get lost. There's no way to get lost. And the easiest way to find your way in just keeping your eyes forward is to follow these distinct markers, either the scallops, which you see on monuments and on sides of buildings, or sometimes just yellow rocks that were laid out in arrow form. But it's a one-way journey. Everybody's going the same way. So navigation isn't one of the challenges I ever experienced as doing part of the Camino. Here's the part that is. So I thought I'd tell you a handful of stories about boots and backpacks, and in my case, bubble gum. So of course, boots and backpacks, these are your friends. These are the things you should spend the most time discerning what works for you. And people have all different notions about what kind of footwear works best for them. For me, I decided a hiking shoe was better than a hiking boot, because hiking boots that went around my ankle actually just caused more chafing and blistering. And so I just went with the basic shoe, but different people did different things. But almost to a person, the smallest of blisters on people's feet would just knock them out. They could be the fittest of fit, but once they started to get blisters on their feet, they were hobbled and crippled in a way that rendered most of them unable to continue. So I was determined that that was not going to happen to me. And different people said, oh, you should try these socks, or you should powder your feet, or you should get these moleskin pieces that you can wrap your feet in. And I tried, when I did all different kinds of training hikes, I tried all of those different things, and they worked to a fair degree. But the best advice I got actually came from my friend Jess, who said, oh no, the best way never to get a blister is duct tape. And I was like, duct tape? You mean that really strong strident tape you use to, hold the stuff together? And she said, yeah. She said, before you start hiking, just wrap whatever areas your feet are fairly vulnerable, like maybe your heel or the edge of your instep or your big toe, whatever it is that is a problem area for you, just wrap them in duct tape and then just put your sock and shoe on and you won't have any problem. And then take it off at the end of the day. And I said, but the adhesive on duct tape is so strong. I couldn't imagine after my feet had gone through a day of hiking to kind of yank that duct tape off. I thought, that's crazy. She goes, Ann, just trust me, just do the duct tape. So I did. And I am proud to say that she was totally right. Because basically, when you wrap your feet in duct tape, whatever areas, it stops any friction from happening. And it's the friction that, of course, gives you the blisters. And at the end of the day, after you've walked your 10 or 15 miles or whatever it is, the tape actually peels right off because your feet, of course, are sweating. You're hot. And so there is no yanking at the end of the day. It just peels right off. So you don't actually do damage to your skin, your very tender skin on your feet, by using duct tape. So again, that's my advice to would-be hikers, is just to try that to see if it works for you, because the health and well-being of your feet is a deal breaker for any kind of long distance hike. The other piece, of course, is your backpack. And there's this tendency, of course, to think, I estimated it would take me 40 days to walk across Spain. That's a long time. So I thought 40 days in all different kinds of terrain, all different kinds of temperatures. I need this and I need this and I need this. And when I went to REI, which acted as my hiking guru, and they suggested I get this particular pack, fairly small, made for women. And I looked at that pack and I looked at this ginormous pile of things that I wanted to put in. And I thought, there's no way that I can take all of that stuff. And I heard this equation given to me that horrified me. So I'll give it to all of you. This is how long distance hiking, this is what they suggest the weight limit should be for hikers. So you should take your weight, whatever that is. You can do the math for yourself. Take your weight and then take 10% of that, whatever that number is. And then most folks suggest that you use one of those interior otter packs so that you can have a source of hydration throughout the day instead of depending on water bottles. And because you're also shouldering that instead of carrying it on your hands or your waist. Those are generally, when filled to the top, about 8 pounds. So take your weight, take 10% of that, deduct 8 from that, and whatever remains is the total amount of weight that should be left in your pack. That is a scandalously small number. So if you're 150 pounds, that means you have 15 pounds minus 8. That means all of your gear, your food, everything, 7 pounds. That's nothing. So of course, people pay no attention to that rule and just fill their packs with all different kinds of stuff. And then they suffer. Oh, do they suffer when they have to carry that over 500 miles. The first day, okay, the second day. And I would see my colleagues, my peers on the path, literally dumping stuff out of their pack every single night. Nice, beautiful things, expensive things that they thought, I just can't bear it. I can't bear to carry any of this anymore. So while I might not advocate that you be that strident with your weight piece, the lesser is better, because over the course of 500 miles, it just can be brutal to carry that amount. All of that said, as part of that discussion that day when we were trying to figure out the packs and who was going to carry what and how much it was going to be, all of us decided that we needed one luxury item. Even if it was heavy, even if it was irrelevant, we just needed something that was going to give us comfort if we were going to do this really significant event. And so all of us went around the room and chose what we were going to do. Jess, to her credit, she's an artist. And so she decided she was going to take a very expensive and very heavy camera and set of lenses. Thank God she did, because I have beautiful pictures from the trip, but she shouldered that weight. I did not. And I'm eternally grateful that she did it. Sasha actually decided to bring a journal, to bring a notebook, and to bring a pen, which was, fairly heavy, but he just felt like he needed to be able to process in that way each day. And he wanted something to be able to write with and to write on. So he decided he was going to go with a bound journal and a pen. Both Meredith and Beth decided they were going to take those small iPods so that they could listen to music as they walk, because that was something that they wanted to do. I wanted to be in silence, but they thought it would be a good distraction to have some music playing while they walk. So they did that. And then I decided that I would bring 40 pieces of Bazooka bubblegum as partly just a little piece of home, partly as just a treat at the end of the day to have a piece of really sugary, sweet deliciousness that would kind of give me a little energy boost. And partly because each day that pile would be depleted. And it was a way for me to sort of track the days. And even though it was a small amount, it did make my pack lighter and lighter and lighter as I got toward the end. So I ended with 3 pieces left, because again, I did the walk in 37 days. But after I got back, I had no intention of writing a book about this experience. And it was so transformative that after I got back, I felt like I really needed to process it in a different way. And writing is one of those ways that happens for me. So I started to do that. And after, completing the book and having it published and all that kind of stuff, I was looking for ways to help promote it. And I actually did write to the people at Bazooka Bubblegum. And I said, I did this crazy thing. I walked 500 miles. Your bubblegum was what saved me. And they actually became in a weird way, my sort of de facto sponsor. So they consistently ship big tubs of Bazooka bubblegum to me on a fairly regular basis that I bring to all my book events and pass out to people that come. And really, Bazooka bubblegum saved me. And so I'm so glad I did that. And then I think the last piece is really, why? Why would anybody in their right mind think that walking 500 miles was a good idea? And everybody I met before I went on this trip, that was their number one question. Why are you doing this, Anne? This is crazy. I would never do it. Why do you want to do it? And it occurred to me that I actually should ask everybody I met on the pilgrimage why they were doing it, because in some ways I wasn't exactly sure why I was doing it. So here's a little brief excerpt about that little piece that comes sort of near the end of the book. Everyone who heard of my plan to walk across Spain asked me why. Some asked in jest, at first not realizing I was serious. Some were suspicious, as if my motivation was some sort of indication of instability or folly. Still others asked from a place of ardent curiosity, expecting the reply to be less of an answer and more of a revelation. Over the course of the last 350 miles, I too had asked nearly everyone I met this same question. What brought you here? What was so compelling that it wrenched you away from your life of comfort and deposited you here on this lonesome trail? And much to my surprise, almost everyone gave me the exact same answer. My heart is broken. Some were in the throes of a divorce. Some were mourning the death of a parent. Some had found themselves abruptly out of a job. Some longed to revive the relationship they once enjoyed with their children. Some ached for their youth. Some had had their world shattered by alcohol or drugs, or were victims of sexual violence. When I first considered walking the Camino, I didn't recognize any of these kinds of somber undercurrents in my own motivation. I saw the pilgrimage as an adventure, something that would push me to the very edge of my physical capabilities. Like anyone embarking on a marathon, I considered only the distance to be traveled, not the depths to be explored. But like quicksand, the Camino had caught me unaware and ill-prepared, swallowing me whole before I even knew what was happening. Just a few steps in, and I was already drowning in feelings of grief and contrition and regret right up to my neck. So here's the boy and I, here's Sasha and I at the beginning. As I said, he was the only one that went the full distance with me, the full 500 miles. The other three decided they were just going to do the 100-mile segment between Pamplona and Burgos because, you know, they were adults and had jobs and had responsibilities and stuff. not teachers, not faculty that had all of their summers off. But I think in many ways, we were a perfect match. We were obviously different in almost every way. And I think it was really comforting to me to have someone so young, so physically strong, so optimistic and really lighthearted, so innocent in many ways of sort of the way that life can bully you around. And for him, I think it made him feel safe that he was with somebody that had a fair amount of experience that could sort of get us out of jams if we ever got into jams. And in the end, I really recognized that even though he had a wonderful experience and he found it personally fulfilling to do this walk, he really did it just for me. Only for me. And even now, all these years later, he still feels like a son to me. I'm so grateful that he did this trip with me, and the bond between the five of us, the Fab Five, has continued on now, all these years later, and we share something really unique and wonderful that changed all of us and changed all of our lives. So that's the piece about the book. As I said, writing this book was not what I had thought I was going to do. And I was told memoir is the absolute worst category to write a book in, unless you're somebody famous like Prince Harry, where you have an automatic audience. And I said, you know what, I just don't care. So I wrote the book in a way from the skeletal structure first into the content. So I decided, I am a Christian minister. So I decided that I was going to have 40 chapters, that somehow I was going to tell this story in 40 chapters as an homage to the season of Lent. And I have put together those chapters in big groups by category, by liturgical season, not in the order that they actually occur, but by the emotional content that I felt. So for instance, for those of you who are familiar with those terms, there's sections of the book that are called Epiphany and Ordinary Time and Good Friday and other kinds of pieces of the Christian calendar. And by taking that structure, I found a way to dump the contents of the walk in a way that made sense for the book. And the chapters sort of go back and forth between the chapters that focus primarily on the mechanics of doing a long distance walk, with chapters that are pretty much about the backstory of why, for me, why I ever attempted this kind of walk. At the end, I thought the reader would be interested to know whatever happened with all those wonderful people that I met during that 40-day span of time. And I'm still in touch with those folks that I met. And so the epilogue is the continuation of their stories, where they are now, what's happened to them now, which I think is fun for the readers. And one last little nugget that I'll give you, in thinking about, I'm not a graphic designer, and thinking about how to do that piece, I decided I wanted this very, for the chapters of each heading, to have this very linear, sleek kind of look, with the scallop shell being the thing that would hold the chapter heading. And then this is actually just a line that recognizes the actual map of the journey. So on the chapters where there's a little figurine, and you can watch that figurine kind of go across and eventually end up at the scallop shell, we were trying to find something that would mark where I was. And we decided we should have this little figurine. And one of my friends, who is a graphic designer, sent me this black and white profile of a girl with like a ponytail. And I said, oh my God, this is the idea. This is great. We'll put her on the map and watch her sort of make her way across. But I said to my friend Steve, I mean, it's obviously a girl. She looks young. She has this hairstyle of somebody who's young. So it doesn't kind of match with this experience. And he sardonically said to me, do you want me to make her matronly, Anne? And I said, no, that's not what I said, Steve. But he said, listen, why don't you just go outside, put on the gear that you did the walk with, your pack, your walking poles, the whole get up, have Beth take a picture of you in profile, and then I will shrink you way, 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 way down. So that little figurine actually is me with my pack and my walking sticks. It actually is my profile that you see making my way across the line, eventually getting to Santiago, to the scallop shell. So it was just a fun little treat for me to put into the graphic design piece of it. Otherwise, I left it to professionals to do. But again, the front cover is a picture that Jess took with her beautiful camera during our walk. And I'm grateful to her for providing some of the images that are inside the book. There you go. That's end scene. I hope that was long enough and not too long, in case folks do have questions about this particular experience, or maybe things that you're thinking about doing in this same vein. I'd love to hear them.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Anne. That's
Sure.
if people have a question, just because we're a small group, feel free to do if you know how, the raise hand function, which is under reactions at the bottom of your screen. You just sort of click on reactions, and then there should be sort of a raise hand element that allows you to raise your hand. But I'll start us off with a question. So I actually read the book, so I probably might be the only person other than yourself who actually has read the book. And it's a very personal book. So you go into a lot of things that affected you very profoundly, from your father's passing to, you mentioned a first marriage, your brother's struggles. And yet you also say you're shy. And so I'm wondering how you found the sort of the bravery to write about all these things, and whether that was difficult for you, and then whether you checked with people to find out how they would feel about different sections that they might be appearing in.
I absolutely checked with people, because much of it is my own personal story, and I felt like I could write as much or as little about that as possible. But I think it's important for people to really see that vulnerability, and to really be honest about the person I am, my frailties, my shortcomings. And one of my first friends that read the book said, his comment about it was that it was shockingly honest. And I said, that's the point, Mark. That's the point. I mean, you have to just come clean about all of these different things that really motivate your life and how you move through it. Both of my parents were deceased when I wrote this book. So I didn't check with them, but I did check with the people that did the walk with me, with the other people that I talk about at the end of the book. Certainly talked with my brother, my only sibling, and all of them had not one issue about it and felt kind of freed, I think, in a way, by how honest a portrayal it really was. And because it resonates with other people, you know, we all are conscious of sort of maintaining whatever veneer we have. And so when somebody pulls back the veneer, I think it can be helpful for other people who are reading it. Thanks for that, though.
Rick,
and you're a speed reader, because I know you just got the book. Oh my
I
gosh.
did just get the book. But,
Okay. And you reminded me, if let me
yes, why don't you put the
just drop in the
link
chat.
in the
There's
chat?
the link to the book in case folks are interested, or you feel like it might be good for another person in your life who's considering this, or might enjoy that kind of memoir.
Rick, go ahead and ask your question.
It sounds like a fantastic book. Thank you so much, Anne. So much is coming up for me because my partner, who I have a feeling you might know, or you definitely know people in common, did the walk, gosh, probably about 5 years ago. And I had a couple of things coming up for me while you were talking, because he's a runner. He runs probably on average 25 to 30 miles a week.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, and he runs a lot. And he, you know, I think he probably at some level thought this was going to be, you know, a cakewalk. And the very first day that he set out, from the same point that you set out in France, walking, he hurt his foot.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't he twisted his ankle. It wasn't like he literally walked the wrong way, which proved that like walking is just really different compared to running. And so that was a really interesting thing for to happen to him. The second thing that came up for me was when you were talking about the Meseta. We were both living in London at the time that he decided to do this walk. And I was working in London the 40-ish days that he was walking. And he asked me to join him for a part of the walk. And I said, sure, maybe I'll join you around my birthday weekend. We can kind of make it a thing. And I had no idea that the weekend that I was going to join him was on this portion of the walk, the Meseta. Oh my gosh. I was laughing as you were speaking, because I totally understood what you were getting at in terms of that interminable flatness. And but you know, having said that, we had the most amazing weekend, and I will always have that memory of the town of Carrión de los Condes, you know, a town in the middle of nowhere that you would have no reason to go to ever. And that's kind of that was the focal point of that period of time for us in the Spanish Meseta. That was, I mean, it's just, looking back on it, it's just a really special experience. I have a question for you, and the question is, you mentioned that you did not bring along a journal, yet you were able to kind of afterwards bring it all together in enough structure and enough thought to put together a book. How did you do that? Was that made a lot more difficult because you didn't keep a journal? How did that work?
I didn't bring the journal, but Sasha did. So he started writing from the front, and the first day I stole his pen and I started writing from the back. So I just used the pages, because so much of the detail of the book I had to get from that journal. I would have never remembered all of those things in that amount of detail had it not been for really, and I wasn't taking notes to write a book. I was just wanting to be able to read something that would spark that same emotion again. And so when he was done, I would start scribbling my own notes going from the back. He was very gracious about that. But to your point about the gait, it's very important to go at your own speed. And that if you try to go, in my opinion, if you try to go too quickly or too slowly to keep up with somebody or to maintain a conversation or whatever it is, eventually your hips, your knees will sort of get out of whack. You have to just go at your own pace. And my own pace is really tortoise-like. In fact, it became a joke that I did the entire Camino and did not pass one person. I never stopped. Like I just kind of, did this, but I never passed anyone. And this past summer, I took a handful of my ninth graders from Harvard Westlake to do the last 100 miles. And they're like rubber bands, of course. They're, prancing down the trail without one care in the world. They're so young. And at one point, one of them said, Rev, you need to try to keep up. And I was like, guys, I'm 45 years older than you at this point. And they were like, what? I think they were shocked to recognize that math. But one of the last days, and this same thing continued, like everybody just passed me. And I eventually would pass them again, when they were stopping for lunch. We would go back and forth, but I never actually passed anybody on the trail itself. And one of the last days I was there, this woman passed me, and she was in a skin tight black, like leatherette catsuit, smoking. She passed me. She passed me, Rick. So we went from like humility to humiliation. And so my record is still 100%. I still have not passed one person while walking on the Camino, but it just goes to show you, it's the sort of the old adage of the turtle and the hare. I'm definitely the turtle.
Thank you.
If anyone else has a question, raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll keep going. Glenn, go ahead.
I just have a couple practical questions. Thank you very much. It's been very, very interesting. My understanding is you can do sections of it. And how do you sort of plan in advance? Do you need to make reservations? How does one handle just the practical element of it?
When I did it in 2010, I did it sort of in the very traditional form. I had planned to do the whole thing, although many people just do it in sections or pick a section and just do that section. I stayed in albergues, which are basically a lower level American hostel where you pay a really nominal amount, like $5, and you get a cot and a shower. That's it. And you're in a huge gargantuan room of all different kinds. And they're reserved only for pilgrims that are walking the Camino. They're not a place that anybody else can go. You have to show your little pass in order to potentially stay there. And you cannot make reservations. So at least at that time you could not, and there was no cell phone service at all on the Camino. So when you walked, you might walk 10 or 12 miles and then get to an albergue, and you might be exhausted and say to them, okay, like, I'd like to come in, and they might say to you, I'm sorry, there's not room anymore. And then you think, okay, do I walk to the next town? Do I sleep outside? And there's a real journey of faith that's part of this is why I was let go, because I wanted to try to control all those things, and I could control none of those things, not where the next town was, not whether they were going to have food, not whether I was going to have access to water. I just had to take it all on faith. But luckily, because I had Sasha, as this trail kind of wore me down, there were days when I would say, you know what, this is the town I think we should stop in for the night. Go to it. And he would fly on that trail, and he would get in line in the very beginning. He would reserve a space for us, so I could walk at my own space and at my own pace and never worry that there would be space for me. Now, there's not only, and so I would correspond with Sasha and the rest of my group. We would figure out where we were going to meet, and it would always be the church, because there was always a Catholic church in whatever town, even the smallest of towns. We would say, okay, walk until you get to this town, stop at the church, and we'll all meet up as a group. And we kept on doing that, but we had no way of corresponding. And there was one day when we had to change our plan, where I literally took a stick, old school, and scraped into the dirt of the trail a message the other members of the Fab Five and said, hey, we're going to change plans, get off at the next turn, and prayed that they would see it instead of just sort of being wandering or yapping with somebody and miss it completely. Luckily, they did. But it was right out of like my, childhood when I used to put a, paper cup with a string up to my brother and, talking between our rooms and stuff. It was very old school. But now you can, cell phone exists. You can be in correspondence with people. You can make reservations at pensions in these various places. So you can have privacy, your own bathroom. You can know where you're staying. There are many companies that will transport your pack for you. So you can just take a very, very, very small day pack, basically some food and water, and not have to bring all of your belongings on your back. I chose to do it in a different way because I wanted a different kind of experience, but it's so much more malleable now to be suited for any kind of age bracket, any kind of physical condition, any kind of trip planning. The best book, I feel like, is because there's many guidebooks that talk about the Camino, many, but in my mind, the best guidebook is something by the author John Brierley. It's I'll just put it in the chat in case you're looking, but I found his guide to be well above. His is sort of considered the Bible of the Camino de Santiago. So if you're looking for something as far as planning, his is great. Maps and content.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask? We're kind of at the hour. I don't know, Anne, can you stick around for?
Sure, whatever people want to do.
Well, I have another question, just because you mentioned that you did some training to train for the distance of walking, for long distances. But he also said that you had to prepare yourself mentally. So how do you do that?
I think for me, the physical part was much easier to do and imagine. You would put a pack on, you'd put your shoes on, you'd break them in, you'd, traverse trails and hills and all that kind of stuff. But mentally, I knew it was going to be a grind and that there would be points where I'd be really physically uncomfortable, that I'd be over it. I'd be like, I'm done with this. And I wanted something more than abject pride to pull me through the next, stage. And that was part of the reason that it was so great to do it with some other people, because they buoyed your spirit. And every time I was in a little bit of a trough, I never quite matched up emotionally with the other people that were with me and was pulled out of that. And all of us kind of did that for each other. But when I got to those really uncomfortable moments, and there certainly were some physically, particularly around the bed bug bites, oh my gosh, that was really uncomfortable. And just the heat, I just withered in the heat. In the end, I just kept the same mantra, which is, you know what? The only thing you have to do today is walk. That's it. You don't have to answer emails. You don't have to deal with your boss. You don't have to, look after your kids. You don't have to be, driving somebody to their ballet appointment. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is walk. And if you can take one step, you can definitely take the next, and you can take the next, and you can take the next. And you are the master of your own fate. If you want to stop after 2 miles that day, stop, because it's supposed to be fun. If you want to do 20 miles one day, do 20 miles, but no one's telling you what you need to do. You have total control over how this is going to look, and just enjoy it. The only thing you have to do today is walk.
I wonder if you can apply that to other things in your life now.
Sometimes I try. Sometimes I try.
What most surprised you about this trip?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think the camaraderie, the depth of the camaraderie. I assumed I would meet people and sort of chat the chat, on the trail, or share a meal or two. But I found that we sort of went in step with the same kind of groups of people after we got on the trail for a little while. And so oftentimes at the albergues at the end of the night, I would see people I had seen in albergues, you know, days before and weeks before, and you form this bond with them. And it's like you're seeing an old lost friend, like, oh, it's so good to see you. And you have dinner together and you talk about how the hike went and you talk about the next couple of days. And it's that reason that all of those people are still my friends now, 12 years later. It's because we really got to know each other. I mean, all we did was walk and talk. So it's funny how ambulation allows people to talk about stuff that they wouldn't normally talk about. You know, they share, when your eyes are just forward, there's something magical about that process of walking that allows people to just sort of exorcise things from their heart. And because they don't know you and you're not their family and you're not, you know, their coworkers, they feel free to share with you things that are really deeply personal. It was really magical to have that kind of connection in such a short period of time.
I just have one more question, but of course, anyone else is free to ask something. But once you got to the end, were you, or you knew you had, you know, just a few more, you know, days to go, or were you really champing at the bit to get to some civilization and to sort of get for it to be over and to get back to real life? Or did you know you were going to miss it? Or, and then sort of the other side of that question is, once you were back in, you know, regular time, so to speak, did you miss it? Did you sort of miss the feeling of just having to walk?
In the last couple of days, I think we had a little bit more giddy up in our step because we were looking forward to the real creature comforts that the end provided. You know, staying in a hotel, really having long hot showers, really washing all of our clothes, stuff like that. Being able to sleep in, you know, on clean sheets, all of that stuff. But I actually had a fairly difficult time when I returned back to the United States after doing the Camino. And I kind of fell into a pretty deep funk. The silence and the solitude of it, I found deeply meaningful and refreshing. And I just felt like coming back to my old life, the dorm and the campus and work, just to be a huge cacophony that was disquieting. So it took me a while to kind of get back into civilization, so to speak. So it was sort of a both and. I appreciated some of the creature comforts of the immediacy of finishing, but no, it really kind of bore into my bones and pulled me. Just like that first conversation I had where it inexplicably kind of pulled at me, it kind of continues to pull at me, which is why I was so glad to take some of my students back again and to experience it again in a very different kind of way under different circumstances. We didn't stay, the kids and I did not stay in albergues because I couldn't tell a mother, I don't know where your kid's going to sleep tonight. I was like, that is not going to happen. So we did make reservations in pensions. And so, but it also meant we had to get to certain towns at the end of each day because we needed to keep on a certain pace. So we lost some of the freedom of that, but they were only 12. So we needed to have some structure that we could report to the parents with. But it does, yeah, it's a yearning that I never completely got over after doing it.
Wow. Well, it does sound like a transformative experience, obviously. And thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thanks for having me. This has been so much fun.
Thank you.
Once again, I suggest people buy the book and read it. It's quite good and interesting. And I think the link is in the chat, but of course you can just get it from your local independent bookstore by asking them to order it or get it off Amazon. And again,
I'm just going to put one more thing in the chat here. If anybody wants to be in touch, that's my email at Harvard Westlake. Pretty easy. First initial, last name, hw.com. So if you decide and you're planning and you want to have a chat about it or whatever it happens to be, feel free to be in touch. It was really nice meeting all of you, and I appreciate you taking time out of your Monday night and spending some time with me in the Camino.
Yes, and enjoy the rest of your week, everyone. I'm going to stop recording.